Namaste, and welcome to tonight's fireside conversation. My name is Abhilasha, and I will be your chair for this evening. Here at Vichar Manthan, we bring in leading experts to earnestly explore ideas through a Dharmic lens. Our conversation today is not designed to provide any conclusive answers to the questions raised. Rather, we aim to spark a conversation so that some fruitful dialogue can be made in the next days, weeks, and following months. For today's fireside, we have a topic which challenges us all, and it's been at the forefront of people's minds in the last 18 months. That is uncertainty. Human beings are often described as creatures of habit, and that's based on this underlying premise that we crave a sense of order to feel in control. How do we build, yet life is inherently uncertain. And this uncertainty can often trigger anxiety within us. How do we build our own capabilities in order to manage such uncertainty? Does British society provide an environment for the flourishment of these capabilities? How can Dharma help us deal with uncertainty? And does current Hindu culture or society align with this? To help us unpack some of these questions and further explore the topic, I'd like to introduce the speaker for this evening, Dr. Mihir Meghani. Dr. Meghani is a board member and a co-founder of Hindu American Foundation, which is an educational and advocacy organization focused on educating the American public about Hindu Dharma. By profession, Dr. Meghani is an emergency physician in California, and he's been involved in many voluntary projects around the world as a physician and otherwise. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Meghani.
Yeah, namaste, Abhilasha ji. Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm glad that the time zones worked out. You guys have a great setup. I'm excited.
Wonderful. So for our audience at home, I encourage you all to ask your questions as you watch live. So in the chat function below, we'll be picking these up later on in the discussion. So Dr. Meghani, as a way of opening our conversation, it might be worth briefly introducing what's going on in society today. Now, the primary narrative, in my opinion, around uncertainty is quite a negative one. And that to me implies that there's something bad about it. But as a child, the word surprise could be used to mean something quite similar, but that has a positive connotation. Why is it that this word uncertainty has come to mean what it does today? And why can navigating the uncertainty of life seem so difficult? I want to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about how our relationship with uncertainty has evolved over time, and how has Hindu society reacted to this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question. I think these are times when there is a lot of uncertainty, but the perspective I have comes from my own Hindu upbringing and what I've learned by participating in Hindu activities and swamis, going to youth camps, just like many people who are watching today. I look at uncertainty as a part of our existence. Just like there's, good, bad, adharma, dharma, there's sunrise, sunset. There's always uncertainty. Most of our life is uncertain. What's only certain is what we're able to see and perceive. But there's so much that we take for granted day in and day out that is really uncertain. And so the way we should look at the quote unquote uncertainty, what's happening with the next COVID spike, the next variant, the wars that are out there, terrorism, is really not like, God, this is something that's new and it's never happened before, but rather this, just like, viruses, the sunrise, the sunset, storms, floods, hurricanes, these are all a part of our life, our own life, the life of humanity, the life of the planet, and the universe. They're always going to be there. and we just have to, deal with them like they're something on our path. And I'll talk more about path and all that going forward. But I think that's a good, perhaps an opening statement to start with. I'll hand it back to you, Abhilasha.
So how do you think it has changed over time in terms of the way that society has dealt with uncertainty? What was it like before? How were people managing it, and what is it like now?
Yeah, I think, if we go back, let's say we go back historically, right? Let's think about, what was the unit, what was the ecosystem of communication, how did religion and spiritual leaders and the community come together to help people manage things. So if we go back several hundred years, and let's look at like Hindu society, if we go back to India, there are probably smaller units, within a village or just a small region. And they generally knew what to expect in a given year. There was a time when there was a crop, and there would be certain weather, and there were certain unexpected things such as wars and other things that may happen, but those weren't necessarily happening every year. What's happened now as we've come into this modern age of communication is that fear and uncertainty has been amplified by people. Sometimes it's vested interest, sometimes it's just natural, to a point where I think people don't realize that the kind of things we deal with today, the kind of uncertainness of tomorrow and the future, we're always there. It's just that now there are more people talking about it, amplifying it, kind of, giving that negative, in some way, I would say, amplification, so that there's a lot more stress and anxiety. I don't think that we've evolved as well spiritually, and I'm talking about humanity as a whole, not Hindus, but we haven't evolved as a global humanity in understanding and dealing with this as well as we should, partly because the philosophies that really are followed by most people around the world don't really have, I would say, a good understanding of what we call uncertainty and what it means in our life, the cyclical nature of life, the cyclical nature of the universe, and how we as people are bound and will always be living with forces that are not totally in our control. What we can call Vasudeva Kutumbakam, right? In the big spiritual sense, the whole universe being one family, the universe including everything that makes us feel like the future is uncertain, whether it be weather, viruses, people, and other things. If I may add, I'd say that I think the Western view, if we can call it the traditional Western view, has always been that man can control the future, they can control the uncertain, they can colonize this great new world in America and tame the natives, they can control nature, right? We can conquer this virus. We will win against COVID. We will defeat the Taliban and Al Qaeda, right? I mean, these are the kind of narratives we have. But I think from the Dharmic perspective, which hasn't taken over the world but does have pockets, the way we would look at this is that we're always going to be living with these forces. We're in the Kali Yuga, but even if you go back to the prior three yugas or ages, we had good and bad. I mean, those were ages when you had great people like, Sita, Ram, Krishna, etc. But we still had forces that were bad or evil. We still had death. We still had disease. We still have it now. And if we can understand the cyclical nature of life, the universe, everything that we're a part of, understand that we are just a piece of this great universe. We are not the kings of the universe. Then I think we can understand better that uncertainty is a part of our life. It's better for us to learn to live with it, expect it, accommodate it, rather than to fear it, not expect it, or think that we can actually conquer it.
It sounds like you're saying that actually this uncertainty, which I mentioned in the opening as well, is inevitable. It's part of life, and it's more about managing how we live with it rather than trying to control it. You also mentioned there that actually nowadays we aren't as good, or we haven't developed as well in terms of dealing with uncertainty. But could you also not argue that now with increased choice in life, it is harder to make those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're faced with many different choices, but I don't feel like we have the wisdom or the critical social structure to effectively think about things and make slower decisions. And what I mean by that is that if we look back again at like the way thought was developed in Hindu society, right, going back to the Vedic age and others, for example, and all the Dharma traditions, it was based on a lot of introspection. People didn't go to a guru, ask a question, and often get a response in a split second. Often it was, go and do this or meditate, come back in a month, come back in a year. We hear all the stories in the scriptures about people who were sent off on a mission or a pilgrimage, and then they discovered that, right? But now in today's modern age, the responses are quick. People are expected to respond quickly. They're expected to digest something quickly, and then something else pops up in their inbox or on their social media feed. So people aren't really thinking deeply about things. They're navigating to what they expect. And when they expect, when they expect fear, when they expect uncertainty, when they're afraid of the other or the unknown, that's where they navigate to, rather than stepping back, taking time to think, taking time to meditate, which is really the tool of the Dharma traditions, the introspection, the meditation. And so that's the tool that's missing. And so the modern age has exacerbated all of this, yes.
Okay, so there's something about this age of instant gratification that's making all of that quite difficult for us. I want to just move on a little bit to some practical examples. So as an emergency physician, Dr. Meghani, I'm sure you face uncertainty on a day-to-day basis. Can you tell us about an example where you have faced uncertainty, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I'm an emergency physician. We've got a number of colleagues I know in Vichar Manthan and Hindu American Foundation who are also physicians. So we're dealing with this quite a bit. And the way we approach this as physicians, and the way I approach it as a Dharmic and Hindu physician, is that we've got to really focus right there on the moment. And this is a great example of how we have to absolutely have a discipline when we're working. As an emergency doctor, quite often there are instances when we have to make a split-second decision. We don't have the luxury of 5 or 10 minutes. And so what do we have to do? We have to accept that the future is uncertain. We learn from our past, our own past clinical experience. We process this information together. We don't let the fear of what bad thing could happen to that patient to paralyze us and to stop us. But what we do is we then put our duty right there in the forefront. And this is really mindfulness, which is very much a Dharmic concept, Hindu concept as well. We focus on that moment, and what we need to do, knowing that we want to reach a certain goal. We give our best effort, but we also know very well that despite modern and ancient medicine's best skills and science and technologies, there are many, many other things that are involved in that patient's life that we can't control. And whatever is going to happen ultimately is based on not just our effort, but naturally what's going on in the body, what's going on in the environment, things that we can't control. Yeah. And so if there is a good outcome or a bad outcome, it's really a combination of everything and not just us. And this is very helpful for me as a physician because I really want to make everyone's life better. Not just save a life, but I want to make that patient better. I want to get them from not walking to walking, get them from being in a coma to being awake, get them back home so that they can have a meaningful life with their loved ones. But I also don't get down on myself when I've done everything and the outcome isn't good, because I know that everything is not in my hands. So I accept that, but not accept it in a way that, hey, I'm not going to do anything because, it's out of my control. But I accept it because that's a very, very good way to live my dharma, do the best I can, 100%, give 100%, but not be attached to the result.
Okay. You mentioned there about basing some of this on experience, on dealing with some of these situations prior. And I presume, med school, quite a few years you spend in med school. So I presume you train for this, you get practice on a lot of this. But what about situations where you've not had that practice or you've not had that training, and you're put in that situation? Has that ever happened to you, even outside of, at hospital?
Yeah, but I'll be honest with you. I'll say, personally, I don't think med school really gave that training to me. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think, the medical school and scientific training is very much focused on what you can do in science. It wasn't very holistic, honestly. So I'd say that, the way I've practiced has very much been based on this sort of value. It's what kind of drives the inner engine of me, utilizing the tools of modern science. But it's that core philosophy from our Dharma traditions that I've been able to use. And if I may, I'll give another example, maybe a little more practical, about what I'm trying to say, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So, something I'll give an example of, how we should really maybe, I think, look at uncertainty. Many of us like to take hikes or walks, right? We know where we want to end up. It may be the top of the peak, or out there on the the Irish coast, or it may be around that lake or river, right? So we know where we want to go. There's a lot of uncertainty in our path. Our past experience walking, maybe on that trail or something, guides us, but we have no idea what's going to come on that trail. Are we going to see, a fox or a coyote, or some other wild animal, or whatever, right? But we keep proceeding on that path. Now that's a very natural example, right? There's nothing, we're not talking about anything that's really like dangerous or deadly. But if we think about everything we do in life, what we're really aspiring to is a certain goal. Whether it's getting raising the kids, or it's reaching some point in our career, or earning a certain amount of money, or some status, or getting somewhere, or doing something, right? That's really where we're trying to get to. But in everything we do, there's uncertainty that we take for granted. We take for granted that the weather's going to be okay, despite the person, the UK weatherman saying there's not going to be clouds or rain. That person's wrong 80% of the time. There's going to be clouds and rain in London, right? But we take a lot of things for granted. Those are really the uncertainties we're talking about. And in the cosmic perspectives over time, those uncertainties are really certain. There will be a tornado at some point. There will be a hurricane. There's going to be an earthquake. We just don't know when that's going to happen in our life. And so I think, the way we should approach everything is that uncertainty is a part of our life. Just like the cyclical idea of creation, destruction from our scriptures, the universe being reborn, the Brahma day, all these things, we just need to understand that's always going to be there. We don't control everything. Rather than fighting it, having anxiety from it, being scared of it, having fear of it, we should accept the uncertain as a great part of our existence. The randomness, when you take that path and that hike, the uncertainty of what you're going to see should be inspiring. We should be inspired by those flowers we'll see, or the wild animal that runs across the path in front of us. The snake that might be in the bushes that scrambles as we walk, right? These are all things that we should be inspired by, in awe of, maybe enjoy the uniqueness of life, and expect that in our life, we're going to be dealing with, these things that can harm us, like viruses or earthquakes and other disasters. And when we expect that, we won't be as shocked. We'll be in a better position to deal with it. And we can apply that same to people and uncertainties about our relationships.
Right. It sounds like so far what you've spoken about is this idea of acceptance and getting used to the fact that this is part of our life. But I suppose how do we then deal with it? So there's one thing accepting it, but what from Hindu Dharma perspective, how do we deal with this? How can Dharma help? You're on mute, Dr. Meghani.
Sorry about that. I muted myself for water. I think one of the scriptural verses that many people have probably heard about, from the Gita, karmanye vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, etc. That I think scripture is very, very important for us to remember. Something very, very practical. It's not just a verse that's applicable, in ancient times. Very practicable now that, we need to focus and give our best efforts. Not worry about the outcomes. And the way you deal, what's uncertain is that outcome, right? That's the uncertainty we're talking about. The uncertainty of tomorrow, the path that we're taking. We got to focus on our best effort, where we want to go, what we want to do. Except that almost every aspect of what we're doing has a large amount of uncertainty.
Right.
That uncertainty may have a negative impact today, tomorrow, a year from now, but we're going to face that at some point. And it's better for us to shield ourselves in a way that we're prepared, that when something negative or bad happens, since we've expected it, we're better able to prepare for it. Are we prepared for that disease? Are we prepared for the death of that elderly loved one? That uncertainty of when it's going to happen, right? That's a great example. I talk to many patients about. I say, look, I'm going to save your 90-year-old parent now, but you have to realize that the future is uncertain. I can't guarantee they're going to be alive tomorrow, a week, 2 weeks from now, and what you should do in this space of this uncertainty right now is prepare yourself. Appreciate all the time you have with this person. Wrap up the things you need to do with that person. I say that to cancer patients who are like end stage, there's no one can tell you when you're going to pass away. Probably going to be within 6 months. Why don't you spend the next 6 months doing everything you've always wanted to do? You may not have that time again. That's a good way for you to deal with that uncertainty. Knowing this is where you're going to end up. Don't worry and stress on the day-to-day. Reach your goal now. Embrace this unexpected future.
Right. There's a few things I want to pick up from that. So that's a really good example of how we deal with the uncertainty of a loved one passing away or someone being really unwell. But I suppose how you talked about not being attached to the outcome of things, right? How do we practically do that? So someone telling me, don't worry about what happens eventually is fine, but then how do I actually go about taking those steps?
Yeah, I think there's certain practices that are very helpful here. I think one way to really kind of ground your mind, I think what you're really talking about is how do I make this into practice outside of just kind of thinking about it logically. I mean, I think, yoga's great. There are many different yoga paths, but, these are all the practices of yoga, all our schools of yoga are designed to really get our body and mind aligned so that we can have, a deeper thought, deeper experiences outside of, what we can get just in our day-to-day living. Meditation, hatha yoga, and all the different yogas are really designed in that. The other way, people can understand this better is again, by having a guru, a spiritual leader, someone who can help out. But if you want to do something on your own at home, it's pick a practice, some regular practice of yours, whether it's bhakti yoga or hatha yoga, whatever it is you want to call it, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, some practice that takes you away from the hyper reactivity mode that we're in, the response mode where we're just inundated with information. We have to make a quick decision and judgment, to really slowing ourselves down, slowing our mind, body, thought down to a point where we can see universe and time as a whole in its entirety, and then have a better understanding of where we are in that, the great role we have in that, but also our role as one piece of this universe. And I think those practices definitely help us out, because there's no deep insight that you can gain without having some pause from our day-to-day fast-paced life.
Sure. So that
Did I answer
idea
your
of
question there, Abhilasha?
yeah, so that idea of mindfulness you were describing before, and this discipline that you were saying is really important, particularly now. We mentioned the age of instant gratification, where there's so many choices, just slowing our mind and aligning it a bit better. I just want to take this opportunity to remind the audience to keep sending your questions in. I can see there's plenty coming through. We'll get to those. Dr. Meghani, you mentioned a few types of yoga there. I just want to pick on one that you talked about, so Bhakti yoga. Can you tell us how the modern Bhakti movement has been beneficial for people? So the ideas that have come out of that, how have they helped people deal with uncertainty?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that we all need to understand that there are many forces of nature or God that are out there that we may not fully comprehend. From a scientific perspective, we call this, nature, right? You can take it down to the atomic or subparticulate level, all the way, to the level of just mass motion, right, of objects and earthquakes and etc. On a spiritual level, I would just give that parallel and say, we can call all of that God or Brahman. The same things that we call nature, we can call, the force of God or force of Brahman. But the way these things work is not based on our individual need. There's a universe in motion. There's a lot happening that we may not fully comprehend because we are such a small part of it. The Western view always was that, man, this higher force that is called, the Western, or Middle Eastern God, basically, is this one personalized force, and all these people are, meant to serve that, and people are there to kind of dominate the universe. That's kind of been, the traditional way that, we've looked at, the Western traditions. In the East, what we've always said is that, there's a lot more to the universe than us. Everything has a soul force, an Atman. We are part of this existence, the Vasudeva Kutumbaka, the whole universe being a family, not just, humans kind of being the only ones that are important. And so when we talk about bhakti, what we're really saying is that I understand that there is this higher power, which we can call, Bhagwan or God. And I'm going to focus my prayers, my meditation on that force or that individual, depending on how we see that manifestation, right? It could be Bhagwan, Swaminarayan, or Krishna, or Lakshmi, or whoever it might be. But what we're really doing there is we're really simply saying that, hey, I understand that there are forces out there that I can't control. I'm going to label that force this Bhagwan, this God. That's what I'm going to call it. It doesn't change any way that I'm going to act, because I still have to do my duty. I'm still the person who can make decisions and do things the way I want to. But there are many, many other forces that are outside of my control. Like, what is Abhilasha going to do today? What's my wife going to do today? I can't control everything. Right. And everything else is really in the hands of God. I'm not going to take that burden of controlling the motions of the stars, controlling the next development of the next COVID variant, the next genetic mutation. I'm not going to leave that in my hands. That's on someone else's. And so I feel that bhakti allows people to take all these forces and think of them in a very, very direct way, which is by looking at an embodiment of these forces, using imagery, allowing us to connect, because everyone can't connect on a level of logic or some unseen force. The beauty of the Dharmic traditions and Hinduism is that we've allowed for people to connect with God through imagery. and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Whereas other religious traditions have maybe shunned on imagery because they felt that that's not appropriate. And what they really were doing is they're just eliminating a way for us to connect with the world around us. And we have in the Dharmic traditions understood that we are people of many different genetic variations, very different upbringings, very different ways of looking at things. And just like Baskin Robbins has 31 flavors of ice cream, we have thousands of ways of finding God through our religious traditions.
What a perfect analogy there. The Bhakti yoga that you described sounds like a very balanced way of looking at things. So, I know that I have control over my actions, but not necessarily the nature or the world or the cosmos. My understanding of the current way that the Bhakti movement is going is not the same as that. Is that right? Can you give us a bit of an idea of what that is? How is that being practiced currently?
Yeah, Abhilasha, can you just clarify what you're asking me again?
So the Bhakti yoga that we read about in the way that Krishna Bhagwan was intended it to be is what you've described, it sounds like. But it seems like to me the current way that the Bhakti movement is going is more around this idea of external locus of control. So just for those who aren't familiar with this term, locus of control is essentially the extent to which we think we have control over our actions and the outcomes of our actions. So if I have a stronger external locus of control, I might think that my actions are happening as a result of God or chance or fate. Whereas what you described being Bhakti yoga is having a very strong internal locus of control. So I know I have control over my actions, and that's what makes things happen. But also there is this external force. So it's a bit more of a balance.
Yeah, I think everyone's got a slightly different level of understanding. I mean, Hinduism, Dharmic traditions are about the journey, not just the destination. And I think everyone's at a different point in their journey to where they need to be. I think that most Hindus and most Dharmic people, while they may maybe visualize this external force in the way you're saying it as the external center of control, I don't think that most people just relegate themselves to saying, well, I'm not going to do anything because it's in God's hands. And I'll give you an example, and maybe this will make more sense. There's a Pentecostal church group that refuses to get the vaccine because they say it's not God's wish. And the question I would, the way I would, juxtapose this with Bhakti is this: that those Christians are looking at an external God and saying that God doesn't want us to do this. It's not natural. But a way a Dharmic person who's a follower of Bhakti may say this is that, yeah, well, Krishna or Swaminarayan, they control everything, but they've also offered us this vaccine, and that's part of God's plan, and I'm gonna take it. And I think that's where, while some people may have this external center of control, as you described it, I think for most Hindus it still doesn't prevent them from doing their day-to-day dharma, and that's the difference I'd say between our when we have an external control within our religion versus how people in other religions may look at things. Of course, there's always overlap. This is not a, it's a broad generalization, but that's how I would look at it.
Okay, yeah, interesting way of looking at it. We mentioned again different types of yoga before, so I know that many theorists agree with this definition that uncertainty is either this lack of knowledge or not knowing something. I'm wondering if other types of yoga can be useful in dealing with uncertainty, so beyond Bhakti yoga.
Yeah, I mean, just if you take like Hatha yoga, right? Just taking different postures. What does that allow you to do? It lets your body get to a position. And by the way, I just want to disclose this. I am not a regular practitioner of Hatha Yoga or anything other than Karma Yoga. So I just want to let that out there, because I have Suhag, who's like our executive director for HFC, and Sheetal, who's our managing director. They are like yoga experts. They're freakingly like crazy yoga people. But that's the practice is designed to allow your body to be able to go into physical positions that allow you to spend the time to deep dive into your existence. That's really what the physical aspects of yoga are there for. And then, of course, when you do karma yoga, which is what I'd call myself a karma yogi, what karma yoga allows me to do in relation to this topic is it allows me to do the best I can, because that's my duty, that's my karma, without having to always be focused on whether I'm a success or failure, because I haven't reached these goals or not. Because most of what makes us a success or failure is not because of us. It's because of a lot of external forces, though we tend to give ourselves credit. We always congratulate someone and ourselves when we do something great, but we don't realize that there's so many external forces we didn't have control over our life. When you go through college, it's like, if you just think about it, there's air, the sun. We take all this for granted. We take that for granted, that we didn't get into a car accident, that we didn't get, have a genetic disease, we didn't die, that we actually we got enough sleep the night before that exam. I mean, there's like thousands of things we take for granted. They're not certain. They were uncertain. And so what we really should do is say, we put a great effort in, and thankfully everything that was uncertain, everything that was the force of God or the force of nature, it all aligned, and that's where we ended up. So that's karma yoga. And of course, the other paths of yoga would be, reading, meditating, learning from, scriptures. Those can all help us on that path as well.
Yeah, I suppose part of that, you just talking about karma yoga, is also the idea of not being attached to the outcome. So whether there was success or failure, it is what it is, essentially. Sounds like what you say. I just want to pick up on, you mentioned Hatha Yoga and doing the postures. How does that help us deal with uncertainty?
Yeah, it's again, I like my colleagues in HF are going to be like, Mihir, how are you talking about yoga? You're not the expert. But for the yoga that I do with a group called Yoga Bharti, I take private classes with them a few times a week. What that 1 hour with them allows me to do is it allows me to not focus on the attacks on Hinduism, Hindu phobia, all the stresses from work, all the things going on in the neighborhood, family, society. But it really allows me to focus that time on reaching certain positions, focusing on my breathing. And by doing that, what happens is that my mind gets tamed. For that hour, my mind is tamed, my mind is controlled. I'm able to realize that, for that hour, the world moves on. That time, all the uncertainties that are out there, I realize that, my contribution to the infinite uncertainty of the universe is very, very minimal. It brings me back to the ground, where I realize that it's not me, that extra 10 minutes I put into doing a couple more tweets, or that extra hour I put into fundraising that's going to save the world and society and everything like that. There are many other factors, but it kind of brings me back. It's at least it kind of brings you back to that grounding, that, you have to continue what you're doing, but just remember that there's a lot more that you can't control. And that hour allows me to kind of, refocus, regenerate, kind of focus on my body as a vehicle for that karma yoga, so that I can, carry on that work, more strongly in the future.
It's more about that stillness and that slowing down that we were talking about earlier. It also sounds like actually there's a bit of an interplay between these different yogas and how they help us deal with uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely. But Abhilasha, I do want to say, I do hope that at some point in my life, I can touch my toes again like I could when I was a kid. But I haven't reached that point in yoga yet.
Don't worry, me neither. Just before we move on to the Q&A, I want to just pick up on a last point here. So we've talked a lot about what we can do as individuals, how we can build our capabilities, how we can gain this knowledge through Jnana Yoga things. So what role can society play in all of this? Can it help us? Might it hinder us? What do you think?
Yeah, I think society as a whole, my personal view is that we need to slow down a bit. I think we need to bring in some of the spiritual wisdom from the one-on-one level that we've had it within Hinduism, that the wisdom that was passed down between, let's say a guru and individual. We need to get those principles applied into the structures of society. Unfortunately, because the structures of society and many of the major forces that guide the institutions of society today, which are predominantly the government, media, and academia, because they're not very spiritual, they're really very dharmic. I'm not necessarily saying they're evil. Some of them are, but I'm not saying they're evil. I'm saying they're not dharmic. They don't have right now. There's no capacity in these three structures for really understanding like the bigger picture of things, to develop this resilience and the strength we need internally to deal with the uncertainties of the future, to deal with the uncertainties that individuals will face, that families are facing, because it's so focused on what's happening next, right, what's happening right now, the need to respond being the primary priority for everything, politicians, the media, as opposed to, no, that's not our priority. Our priority is to prepare for tomorrow, prepare for a week from now, prepare for the more important goals of next year in the future. Now, if we see what's happening, spirituality has always been really focused on live in the moment, but think about where you want to be tomorrow, next week, next year, in the future. Whereas where modern society is right now is we need to focus right now on that comment, that tweet, that election. And that's all about tomorrow. It's not really about 10, 20 years from the future. So I think the challenge is, and I'm probably off on a tangent, like I've been on this whole conversation with you. I've probably gone off on a tangent, but I think the challenge really is for all of us and for people on Vichar Month, and which is really about applying our Dharmic principles. The future is how can we get these values and principles to make our society better, not just us as individuals, society better. How can we get them into these institutions? And that's going to require a lot of effort, a lot of work by individuals leading the charge and restructuring how this can happen. And it can happen because there was a time when we had this in India, and there are institutions that do have this, but there's a lot more work we need to do. And because we have a very long frame of mind and perspective from the Hindu philosophy, Hindu perspective, we I think it'll take a long-term view. And that's very good for us to know, because we're not going to make these changes overnight to get to a better point.
These institutions that you mentioned that do have some of these, this skill set or this capacity, what do they have that other institutions don't have?
In the institutions such as media, government, etc., or?
Yeah.
Well, they're all focused on the moment is really what I was trying to get at. I mean, they're really focused on, win the next election. Let's get that news story out before the next group does. They're not focused on, let's make society better in 20 years. That's not how someone gets voted, right? In America, it's a 4-year presidential cycle. That's the cycle that someone's focused on, or for a member of Congress, it's 2 years. What can I do in the next 2 years to get reelected? Whereas the Dharmic principle has always been, let's think about everything, all of existence, not just that voter, not just this individual, but everything over a long, long period of time. Did I answer your question there or no?
I suppose within society, although you're saying it shouldn't focus on the individuals are what make up society. So I wonder how these institutions, these platforms can build people or almost provide a space to build people's capabilities. How can they do that?
Yeah, so there's some very, very, let's say simple ways we can start with. Yoga in schools. Okay. Let's get yoga in our schools. Let's start at the school level, provide a practice that will help people from any background or religion deal with stress and life a lot better. I mean, it's very well known. Well, I shouldn't say that, Abhilasha, I should let you plug in here, but isn't it well known that yoga, meditation help in psychology? There's a group in California called Carry the Vision that tries to promote meditation and yoga among children who could go down a wrong pathway. So we need to institutionalize that sort of practice. We need to. So you get that kind of practice in there. You'll have a different group of people coming out. We know that people and families, individuals that practice this at home come out with certain skills. They're better able to deal with stress, anxiety, uncertainty, the future. They have better health outcomes. Well, that practice doesn't need to just be one that's within a religious tradition, but if it's brought into the public sphere, we should expect those same outcomes, and studies have shown that. So that's an example. I think the other thing is, other example I'll just give is this, that the framework of how modern society has worked has been, we're going to focus on humans over this many period of years, and humans for this age group. What we need to do is really institutionalize the idea that we need to work for the benefit of the whole universe. So practically speaking, what we mean is not just humans, but the whole planet, the planet itself, the environment, every life form on it, the oceans, the air, and not just over the next 2-year cycle, but over the next 20, 30, 40 years, because our dharma, our duty, doesn't just extend to this moment, but it's the repercussions of that karma that's going to be there. The effects of what we do now that's the karma that's going to be present for the next generation. And if we can bring that philosophy into our thinking, whether we call that Hinduism or not, that is going to lead to a better earth, because right now we're not thinking farther into the future.
Sounds like the two things that you broadly mentioned there were about building our own capabilities. So for institutions to provide that space for us to build capabilities, but also that sense of responsibility, not only for ourselves, but also wider society and the planet as a whole. Really interesting points to take home there. That's the time we have for our month in. So I want to move on to our Q&A. The audience have been patiently waiting. So I'll just get onto those now. We have a question from Sachinanda. So Sachin asks, is there a danger here that we become completely passive and do not recognize human endeavor and ability? Humanity strives to overcome the uncertainty of nature. We call this progress. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. I think dharma means you keep doing your duty. Accepting uncertainty simply means that we're just understanding that there's a lot more, that's out there. Let's take infections as an example, right? Progress would be, we're going to eradicate this infection, and there are some that you may, but you're never going to get rid of bad bacteria and all viruses. They're always going to be present with us. So we need to learn how to, accept that and live with them, and maybe prevent the kind of structures in society, the kind of the lifestyles we lead that maybe promote certain kind of diseases, right? That's really what we're talking about. It doesn't mean we don't try to strive for a cure. It doesn't mean we don't try to find a vaccine. It's just our understanding of what's going on. And what I mean by this is this: we can come into any situation and say, hey, we're going to destroy that, man. We're going to wipe out COVID. But what that means is there's a lack of understanding about disease and virus in society. It's always going to be there. So we have to try to fight this particular strain and defeat it, and this virus or whatever. But we also have to understand that we're going to be fighting viruses and bacteria for a long time. And many of those viruses are part of our DNA. They make us who we are now. We understand that now. For maybe readers or listeners here may not know that, but we've got viral DNA in our genome. We've got more bacteria in our gut than perhaps neurons in our brain that actually help our body. So we already live in symbiosis with many of these things. And so the philosophy should be, we'll fight these battles, but we also need to understand that there's a lot more out there that is going to be coming. You can't win the war against viruses, if somebody wants to coin that term, but we can mitigate the damage. We can change our lifestyles. We should still work for progress. We still have to do our duty, because remember, whichever way we look at what's happening, whether God controls us or we feel like we can control something, we still have a choice to do things. And there's nothing in our dharma that says just because God controls everything we're doing, you don't have a choice to make. You don't have a choice to do something positive. So we still have to look at our life as our battlefield of karma. This is where we play out our karma. This is where we make decisions that are going to affect our future. And we got to do the best we can, because there are forces perhaps that we don't understand or that are more powerful. It's not a reason not to do what we need to do, because at the end of the day, we still have to improve ourselves. And karma yoga, whether we are considering ourselves social servants, is an important pathway for us spiritually.
Okay, so it's that, again, that fine balance of building our sense of responsibility and actually doing something, but there is a limit to that from what it's, yeah. So another question we have here is from Ravi Kakkar. So he asks, does Dr. Meghani think the breakdown of family, social structures has something to do with increased uncertainty?
I do. I think that there's certain wisdom. I look at it from a perspective of like, how does wisdom handed down? And wisdom comes from experience. We aren't born as children with our hard drive, which is our brain, filled with knowledge and wisdom, right? We gain it. It comes from experience. That's really that's one of the great benefits of aging, is we have a ton of wisdom in our hard drive, artificial intelligence, you can call it. With the breakdown of families, the connection between the older generation and younger generation isn't there as much. That connectivity isn't there. And it's not just the breakdown of families, it's what's going on at home within a family. With many more options for people to do things, they're not communicating with each other as much as they may have 30, 40 years ago. They're instead communicating with a device, or with a TV, or a game, or something else. So that's another important loss of wisdom transmission, is that families aren't spending quality time with each other. Are they spending time at dinner? Are they spending those 90 minutes talking about things? Are parents and children sitting down and talking about the day? Or are parents outsourcing raising of their children to somebody else, or to classes, or tennis, or soccer, or piano? But that's. But I also want to disclose, don't have kids, but this is what I observe.
What do you propose is a sort of solution for that then? So how do families who, how are they described here? I think broken families or breakdown of families, where people aren't spending as much time together. How do we, get that knowledge if we don't have grandparents living with us or wider extended family?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think families need to make sure they build in quality time with people of wisdom. And the people of wisdom could be grandparents, but it also could be, friends, neighbors, or it could be a guru or a swami, or someone else. But that, we took a lot of this for granted, I think, in Indian society, right? I mean, people come from, India, and they come abroad, and all of a sudden you realize, well, they took all these traditions for granted. This is one of them. We had this natural mechanism. People had, a guru. They had, elderly around. Well, now I think families need to realize, well, if someone's not going to listen to the mom or dad, the kids aren't going to listen. Well, find a person that they would respect. Now, that it could also be that wisdom is somebody else. It could be, some celebrity who has certain wisdom or something like that. But, we got to find that person, and that's a family's job. Institutionalizing is a lot more challenging. I mean, I have my own views about, laws that should be made to make sure that families stay together, and, people take care of their grandparents, and then don't just, stack them away and in some nursing home, but take care of them. But, those are the challenges. And I think that ultimately, we have to start with a change in ourselves. Then we change, then you change the family, and after that you can change society. As opposed to, man, I'm going to change society first, so that individuals change. I think we gotta go back to changing ourselves, changing our family, and then moving to everyone else first.
This idea of the guru that you mentioned, or somebody who can give us that wisdom, is really interesting, because we spoke about some of the teachings from the Gita earlier, and Arjun was what we know as one of the best warriors of his time, but he still required that guidance from someone because he reached his capability, I presume. Yeah, that's interesting. Just one final question.
Can I add one more thing to that? I think a guru. We shouldn't take guru in a very kind of physical sense either. I mean, I would say a guru could be something that we value and respect. It could be the Bhagavad Gita. That could be the guru, right? It could be Vichar Manthan. That's going to be my guru. How often are you guys on? Like every week?
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. That's this is going to be our guru. I mean, we're gonna join in and get wisdom, but there's got to be some mechanism, and it should be a conscious mechanism we have to learn certain things. Like, for me, like, this is kind of crazy, but That's So Hindu podcast. That's like one of the Hindu American podcasts. I listen to that, Hinduism Today magazine, a great resource. And now I'm going to add Vichar Manthan in. And if I may, Abhilasha, I'd like to put a plug in. I'm making a donation to Vichar Manthan because I think this is extremely valuable. And I encourage listeners to do so. Please contribute in euros. Oops, Prime Minister Johnson won't like that. Contribute in sterling, in pounds. That's better. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. So just one final question before we move on to the closing. Prabhupada asks, Bhakti has been mentioned in the context of a personal divinity. Does the concept also apply in the case of impersonal divinity? And can devotion to a cause help us to overcome uncertainty?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I mean, I think, a cause, nature, the universe, God. I mean, these are all these are all ultimately very, very related. If we're a karma yogi, right, we are essentially devoting ourselves to a cause. Yeah. And the cause should be very much aligned with what quote unquote God would do, right? We're not running counter to where the universe should be, or what the righteousness of God would be, or what Ram or Krishna or Sita would do. So like for me, I would say personally, my higher calling is the cause. I'm not the most religious person at all, by any sense of the word. I'm spiritual in the sense that I do believe in a higher force, but I don't necessarily have the same kind of personal connection as my grandmother did, who was very devoted to Swaminarayan. But I'm devoted to the cause, because for me, the cause of standing and fighting for Dharma, for Hinduism, through the mechanism of Hindu American Foundation is really like my life calling, because I feel like it's going to lead to a better society. It's my path to improve myself as a human being. It's my playing field. It's my Kurukshetra for Dharma. And so the cause ultimately has many unknowns. I can't control how the whole Hindu community of America is going to respond to everything. I can't be frustrated every time like a billionaire decides that they're going to donate like $10 to the Hindu American Foundation when they should really donate $1 million. And so I have to keep doing my part, but I also know I can't control everything else. But because I'm not happy with everything around me is never going to stop me from doing what I need to do, because my duty is Dharma. That's my calling, and I'm here to serve society.
And I suppose that calling looks different for everyone, doesn't it? So your Dharma might be different to another individual.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it is time to wrap up, unfortunately. In order to close today's discussion, I want to ask you one final thing. So we've talked a lot about our individual capabilities, perhaps how society can help develop those structures for us to build those capabilities, and also this idea of being still and slowing our mind. But actually, when it comes to uncertainty, how do we build our intellect in order to discern what to do in the right moment, in order to figure out what's right to do in the moment?
To build up that intellect about what we need to do at that moment really requires a lot of like prep work, right? It's not, it may just come naturally at that moment, but it's like, if I'm a doctor, I need to train to get myself in a position that I know the right thing to do at that moment. And I think spiritually and in the field of whatever yoga or karma yoga, we have to develop that. And that takes practice. It takes time. So from a spiritual perspective, yeah, yoga, meditation, these practices help us get there. With other yogas, it's studying scripture. Maybe that gives it to us. In the field of karma yoga, it's that experience of working with other people and seeing other great social servants and how they operate. But it's also thinking about, being in the moment, understanding where we want to go in the future, what may come up, what are the uncertainties there, so that we're prepared that when those uncertain things become certain, we have a better idea of how we're going to deal with it. That uncertainty of the health of our parents. We know at some point that it's going to be certain that they're going to have this problem. The uncertainty that, hey, is our group going to have funding to continue? Thinking about that so that if that unfortunate situation does happen, we've already thought about it in advance. So does that answer your question, Abhilasha?
Yeah, that wraps it up nicely. So thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Meghani. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the platform with us today. Yeah,
Abhilasha, I want to thank you. I've learned as much from just talking to you and your team, from all of this. It's just been tremendous. So I want to thank you. You've been a great host. You're not just a psychologist, but you're definitely a deep person. And I really like what Vichar Manthan is doing. The whole team. I really encourage everyone to support Vichar Manthan and look forward to working with all of you. Thanks again for this opportunity on Saturday.
Thank you very much. Well, this has been a really insightful discussion for myself, but also hopefully for the audience at home. I think one of the things that I'll be taking back with me is this idea of, in order to build our capabilities, it can come from a range of different things, whether that's building up our knowledge base or our capacity to do things, and also some of the limits on that, and being, accepting that there are going to be limits there. As with many of our conversations here at VM, it has fed my curiosity, but also left me with more questions to answer. If you have enjoyed today's discussion and you see value in our work, then please do consider becoming a well-wisher. Vichar Manthan is run entirely on a voluntary basis, and our work is supported by our generous well-wishers. If you do wish to become a well-wisher, then you can do so by scanning the QR code on the screen or following the link that has been posted in the YouTube chat. We also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel by pressing the subscribe button below, and to join our mailing list by going to vicharmanthan.org/mailing list. That way you can stay up to date with our future events. And finally, we hope to see you at our next virtual event on Saturday, the 18th of September, entitled, What is Sustainable Leadership in Local Government? I'm sure it's going to be a great one. So once again, thank you to our speaker, Dr. Meghani, and thank you to you all at home for joining in and contributing to the discussion. Namaste and Shubh Ratri.